There was something in his eyes that truly terrified me. There are some moments in life that never leave you, no matter how hard you try to forget them. This story is one of those moments. It began on an ordinary evening when the air was calm and the streets looked quiet, but deep inside me, I felt a strange uneasiness that I couldn't explain. I didn't know then that something as simple as a look in someone's eyes could shake me to my core. I was sitting in a small café, lost in my own thoughts, when I first noticed him. There was nothing unusual about his appearance. He seemed like just another stranger passing by. But the moment our eyes met, I felt something I had never felt before. His eyes weren't just looking at me. They were piercing through me, as if he could see every hidden corner of my soul. It wasn't just a glance. It was something far deeper, something I couldn't put into words. At first, I tried to ignore it. Maybe I was imagining things, I told myself. But the longer I sat there, the stronger the feeling grew. His stare wasn't cold, but it wasn't warm either. It was heavy, unsettling, almost as if there was a secret behind it that I wasn't supposed to know. My heart began to race, and I found myself holding my breath, waiting for something to happen. What was it in those eyes that terrified me so much? Why did I feel as if I already knew him, even though I had never seen him before? That night marked the beginning of a story I could never forget, and it all started with the eyes of a stranger. That night after leaving the cafe, I couldn't stop thinking about him. It was strange because I didn't even know his name, but the way his eyes had locked on mine kept replaying in my head. Every time I tried to sleep, I would see them again, sharp, unsettling, almost carrying a message I wasn't ready to hear. It felt less like a memory and more like a shadow following me. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. People cross our paths every day, and sometimes our minds just exaggerate small things. But deep inside, I knew this wasn't just a small thing. Something about him stayed with me in a way I couldn't explain. Even the thought of those eyes made me uneasy, as if they carried a truth I wasn't ready to face. Days passed, but instead of fading, the memory became stronger. Every corner I turned, every crowded street I walked through, I felt like someone was watching me. Sometimes I would catch myself looking over my shoulder, expecting to see him again. The city felt the same. The people around me carried on with their usual lives, yet for me, something had shifted. I wasn't the same person anymore. One evening, I returned to the cafe, half hoping it was all in my head, half terrified that I might see him again. The place looked normal, the soft sound of cups clinking, the low hum of conversations, the smell of fresh coffee, but I couldn't shake the tension building inside me. I sat near the window, pretending to read, while my eyes scanned every face that walked in. And then, just as I began to let my guard down, I felt it again, that same heavy pull, that invisible thread that made me lift my head. My heart skipped a beat. Across the room, there he was, seated in the same quiet corner as before. This time, he wasn't looking directly at me, but I could feel it. Somehow, I knew he was aware of my presence, as if he had been waiting for me all along. I wanted to move, to get up and leave, but my body wouldn't listen. Something kept me frozen in place, torn between fear and curiosity. What was it about him? Why did those eyes still haunt me? And why, deep down, did I feel that our paths crossing again was no accident? I tried to distract myself, staring down at the half-empty cup in front of me, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the feeling that his presence was pulling me in. It was as if the room had shrunk, and every sound around me had faded, leaving only the quiet tension between us. My mind started racing with questions. Why here? Why again? Was it just coincidence, or was there something more? I forced myself to glance at him, just for a second. He wasn't doing anything unusual, just sitting there, his hands folded on the table, his expression calm. But it was his eyes that once again unsettled me. They weren't simply looking around the cafe, they were searching, almost waiting. The way he seemed so composed, while I felt torn apart inside, only made it worse. Over the next few days, things became stranger. Wherever I went, I had the sense of being followed. Sometimes I would notice a shadow at the end of the street, other times a figure disappearing just as I turned around. It wasn't always him, but somehow the feeling was connected to him. I started questioning my own mind. Was this paranoia, or was it real? Friends noticed I was distracted. One even asked me if something was wrong, but how could I explain? "There's a man whose eyes terrify me," sounded too unbelievable. So I kept it to myself, pretending everything was fine, even though inside I was restless. Then something unusual happened. At work, a colleague mentioned seeing me near the cafe with a quiet man a few nights ago. The problem was, I hadn't spoken to anyone there, let alone been seen with him. How could someone else notice him too? That's when I realized this wasn't just my imagination. He wasn't just a stranger to me anymore. Others had seen him, connected him with me, though I couldn't understand how. I started digging, asking small questions about him at the cafe, but no one seemed to know his name. The staff shrugged, saying he came in often, sat silently, and left without a word. Nobody remembered him ordering much, and yet he was always there. Each piece of this puzzle only made the fear grow stronger. Who was he really? Why did he keep appearing wherever I went? And why, despite the fear, did I feel like I was meant to uncover something that he wasn't ready to reveal? Nights became the hardest part. I would lie awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail of those eyes, that presence, the strange coincidences that followed me everywhere. My phone buzzed with messages from friends, but I didn't reply. How could I explain something I couldn't understand myself? The city outside my window looked alive, filled with lights and sounds, but to me it felt hollow, as if everything had shifted into a different rhythm. One evening, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I returned to the cafe, determined to confront him, or at least to understand what was happening. The moment I stepped inside, my heart sank. He was already there, in his usual corner, waiting. His posture calm, his face unreadable, but his eyes, they carried the same weight, the same haunting pull. I felt as if he had known I would come. I sat at a different table, trying not to look at him directly. Minutes stretched like hours. Every sip of coffee tasted bitter, my throat dry, palms damp with sweat. I told myself to be brave, to get up and walk over, but my legs felt heavy. Then something unexpected happened. He stood up. Slowly, deliberately, he began to move across the cafe, not rushing, not hesitating. Each step echoed louder in my mind than the chatter and clinking cups around us. For the first time, I felt the entire room fade into silence. People kept talking, but their voices sounded distant. All I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. He stopped a few feet away from me, and though he said nothing, I could feel his eyes pulling me in again, almost demanding me to ask the questions I had been running from. But before I could gather the courage, he turned and walked away. Just like that. Out the door, into the night, without a word. The tension didn't end with his leaving. It grew. Why come toward me only to leave? Was he testing me? Was he waiting for me to follow? I couldn't resist. I threw a few bills on the table and rushed outside, but the street was strangely empty. The usual traffic was gone, the sidewalks clear, as if the world had cleared a path just for him. In the distance, I thought I saw a shadow moving slowly under the streetlight. My legs carried me forward, even though my mind screamed at me to stop. The further I went, the colder the air felt, and the quieter the city became. The lights above flickered, and for a moment, I wondered if I was still awake or trapped in some dream. My breaths grew shallow, my chest heavy. And then at the end of the street, I saw him again, standing perfectly still, waiting, his figure outlined by the dim light. I froze. Every instinct told me to turn back, but something stronger kept me rooted there. This was the moment everything had been building toward. The unanswered questions, the sleepless nights, the invisible thread pulling me closer. All of it had led to this. My voice caught in my throat, but before I could speak, he lifted his head slowly, and once again, those eyes met mine. The same haunting stare, only this time, it felt heavier than ever, as if everything I feared, and everything I needed to know, was hidden inside them. The moment our eyes met again under that flickering streetlight, I felt the world stop. It was no longer just fear. It was something deeper, a strange pull that made me feel both exposed and connected at the same time. His gaze didn't move away, not for a second, and I couldn't break mine either. For a heartbeat, it felt like time had trapped us there, in a silent standoff that carried more weight than words ever could. Then, without warning, the lights around us went out. The street fell into darkness, leaving only the dim glow of the faraway lamps. My chest tightened as panic rushed through me. When the lights flickered back to life a moment later, he was gone. The empty street stretched in front of me, silent, as if he had vanished into thin air. I stood frozen, my mind spinning. How could someone disappear like that? I turned back toward my apartment, trying to convince myself I had imagined it, but as I reached my door, a chill ran down my spine. Slipped beneath the frame was a folded piece of paper. My hands shook as I picked it up. There was no name, no explanation, only a line written in uneven handwriting. "You already know me." The words made my stomach drop. How could I know him? Was he someone from my past, a forgotten face, or a stranger who somehow carried pieces of my own life? The mystery wasn't just about who he was anymore, it was about who I was to him. The following days were a blur. I searched old photographs, tried to recall familiar eyes, but nothing made sense. At work, I was distracted. At home, I felt watched. Each night, small things reminded me of him. A reflection in the glass that looked too familiar, the sound of footsteps behind me when no one was there. Friends began noticing my change, but I kept quiet. How could I tell them I was being haunted by someone who may or may not even exist? Then came the second twist I hadn't expected. One evening, while going through my phone gallery, I found a photo I had no memory of taking. It was of me, sitting at the cafe, staring out the window. The strange part? I wasn't alone in the picture. In the background, blurry but unmistakable, were those same eyes watching me. I dropped the phone, my hands trembling. How did that picture get there? Who took it? The timestamp showed it was from weeks ago, before I had even noticed him for the first time. That meant he had been around me long before I realized. The stakes had changed. This wasn't just a chance encounter. He wasn't just some stranger with terrifying eyes. He had been close to me, watching, connected to my life in ways I couldn't understand. And if that was true, then the real question wasn't just who he was, it was what he wanted from me, and why I had been chosen. I couldn't let it go anymore. The photo on my phone was proof that he had been there long before I noticed him. I needed answers, no matter what they cost me. The next evening, I went back to the cafe, my heart pounding, determined to face him. For a long time the place looked ordinary, people laughing and talking as usual, but then I saw him. Sitting in that same corner, waiting. This time, I didn't hesitate. I walked straight to his table and sat down across from him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. His eyes locked onto mine, and the silence felt unbearable. Finally, I whispered, "Who are you? Why are you following me?" He leaned forward, his voice low but steady. "I'm not following you. You've been searching for me all along." His words sent a chill down my spine. Searching? For what? He reached into his coat and slid something across the table. It was an old photograph, me as a child, standing beside a man whose face was blurry from age, but the eyes, they were the same eyes that now stared at me. My breath caught. "How do you have this?" I asked, my voice shaking. He didn't answer. Instead, he said, "You already know me. You've always known me." And suddenly, memories began to flood back, fragmented images of childhood, moments I had buried so deep I had forgotten. A distant relative, someone who had disappeared years ago without explanation. His presence wasn't random. It was tied to my past, to a truth I had tried to erase. I felt relief, confusion, and fear all at once. The haunting eyes weren't of a stranger, but of someone who had been part of my life long ago. For a brief moment, it felt like the conflict had ended, the mystery solved. But just as I was beginning to breathe again, he stood up and whispered something I will never forget. "If you've remembered me, then you know what comes next." Before I could ask what he meant, he slipped away, leaving me with the photo in my hands. And when I looked back down at it, my heart froze. In the picture, the child standing beside him wasn't just me. It was also another figure, a shadowed version of myself, staring with the same terrifying eyes I thought only he had. The photo in my hands felt heavier than anything I had ever carried. Two versions of myself, one real and one shadowed, staring back at me. For a moment, I thought it was a trick, but deep down I knew it was more than that. It wasn't just about him. It was about me, about the parts of myself I had hidden, ignored, or pretended didn't exist. His eyes had terrified me because they reflected the fear I had buried inside all along. Walking home that night, I felt the city different. The streets were still the same. The lights still flickered. People still moved in their usual rhythm, but my own perspective had shifted. The stranger with those haunting eyes was no stranger at all. He was a reminder of the past I had chosen to forget, and the shadow in that photograph was a reminder of the parts of myself I could no longer run from. Over the next few days, I searched less for him and more within myself. Memories returned in fragments, moments of childhood, faces of people I had loved and lost, feelings I had locked away because they were too painful to carry. And slowly, I began to understand. His role in my story wasn't to hurt me or follow me. It was to show me the truth that fear often hides in plain sight. The conflicts, the sleepless nights, the paranoia, it all started with his eyes, but it ended with mine. Because in the end, what terrified me the most wasn't who he was, but what I saw in myself when I looked at him. I never saw him again after that night. The café still stood on the corner, the same chatter and coffee cups filling the air, but the seat in the corner remained empty. And maybe that was the point. He had appeared only to remind me of something I needed to face, and once I did, his presence was no longer needed. Looking back, I realized every encounter, every unsettling moment, had been leading me here, not to him, but to me. The lesson was clear. Sometimes the scariest eyes we meet are not those of a stranger, but the reflection of our own. And that, perhaps, was the truth I was meant to find all along.